Okay. Hi guys, welcome back.
Right.
Howdy.
That's good. That's good, Rick. Jim, what do you have to say?
Well, I don't know yet. It's pretty early in the morning. I want you guys to start it off to set the tone, and then I'll think of something.
Okay. Well, I'd love to say something. Since a Midwestern fellow is saying it's early, at 5 this morning, my time, Pacific time, was when the Megalithomania conference started. Hugh Newman, and it was a gentleman talking about Khufu's pyramid and yada, yada, yada. I wanted to say, how do you know that for sure? But, another time. And then at 7 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock Eastern time was then NERA's conference, which started.
Oh, really?
So I got the first hour of that. Was it Terry DeVoe talking about the OSL dating that they're now doing on these New England chambers.
Right.
Jim, do you know about OSL dating? Do you like that?
Yes, Professor Steinbrink, before he passed, was doing it up here at one of the sites in Wisconsin. You bet.
And so I guess you have to wait, is it right, Rick? 365 days for the results. And then it gives you an approximate range within 7%, but maybe up to 15%. They are saying that they're constructed pre-Columbus. Rick, what do you have to say?
The only thing I can say that this is a very, very new technology. And the results that they're getting are reasonably predictable, I guess would be the best word. And that's what science is. Can you predict the results by repeating the experiment? So they're having pretty good luck with that, but it is still a brand new science. However, it's based on established science, which is how it all has to work. Optical stimulated luminescence, just for those folks who don't know what OSL is. And that's something that I was working on in a very roundabout way when I worked for the Navy. And it is similar in nature. The machine itself is similar to a mass spectrometer, but with different levels of stimulation. Because a mass spectrometer, you have to burst matter off of a surface or out of a gas to get the results that you're trying to read. With OSL, you're trying to figure out how long it takes for that rock to give up its luminescent energy that it absorbed from the sun whenever it did that.
Very good. Well, it's a sample tube with a probe. Basically, Dr. Feathers is giving a talk, they're basically going like to the Manitou site, and the Native Americans, you basically have Native Americans that are pulling strings of NERA. You've also got diffusionists that are pulling strings. So it's like you've got all of these different groups that you have to, appease. And then, so you're looking at soil that's perhaps new soil or old soil, and then a rock that is, has not seen any light prior to the construction. So I love what you say, new science. They are working on the Newport Tower, and we'll, who knows for sure,
right.
But interesting.
And it's a slightly different technique, a lot different technique, but a slightly different technology that they also use to date pottery nowadays. For up until just the last decade or so, there was no reliable way of laboratory dating of pottery or pot shards. And now they have one that kind of works. So, and it's very, very similar in nature as to how when that pottery last saw daylight.
And so we've all talked about this, and I guess I can't help but laugh, but it's sad. But if you want to do some of those thermoluminescence datings, as of right now, you have to have an in with a university, and then why do they want to test your artifact that says it's 2000 BC when you say this farmer found it in his field in Iowa? They're just not going to even look at that or want to look at that. They've got a long list of other things that they want to date, right?
Well, if stylistically it is a old world artifact, you are correct. But if it's something that they can't recognize as old world and it still dates to that, oh my goodness, we've dated something, blah, blah, blah. It's when they find out, like, for instance, the Back Creek stone, that they were looking at it all wrong. And then they remove it from the collection.
Yeah, certainly threw the archaeologists under the bus who found that, their own guy, the Smithsonian guy.
Yep.
I think he was a drinker, so he must have forged this massive, in situ stone at the below the skulls, below the skull. Okay,
Below
so
the 3,000-year-old skulls.
I might add to that, we have the Detroit plates, thousands of them, that the former Secretary of State of Michigan and the Father Savage had collected. And they were accused of faking them all. And they were given to, when they died, given to Notre Dame. They threw them in barrels, classified them as local folk art. Well, of course, now you can, and by the way, they had writing on it that nobody can decipher yet. And obviously Christian scripts. So there's a lot of interest at one time. And now they're pretty well forgotten about, but there are still a few in the labs in universities, mostly in Michigan. And of course, now you could verify that these are modern fakes with thermoluminescence, but they won't let that happen. So,
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be a long time until we can build and certify our own machine.
Jim's ready to put all of his retirement money into one of those machines, and we'll buy one of each machine, and we'll have a lot of fun, won't we?
Well, it would solve a lot of mystery, settle a lot of questions.
Professor Steinbrink had a site in Wisconsin, mostly big rocks, but there was obviously a ceremonial area there on top of this rock outcrop, which had gotten mostly covered by sand or loess. After the glacier left, you had all this dust-like soil on the west, and it came in like snow and covered up to about a foot or so. And he was digging down in there. And the dates he was getting was really old, right after the glacier left, it looked like. So I think there was problem with uncertainty with the radiocarbon that he was getting. So he used this method. And sure enough, the sand that blew in was dated like about 8,000 BC, right after the glacier left. So it works. And I saw him do it. It was just a matter of getting down to where the sand hadn't been exposed for a long time and driving in a little piece of pipe, pulling it out and sending it off to the labs.
And keeping it out of sunlight and all that time.
Yeah.
Because it can reload basically instantly for all intents and purposes.
Okay, all right. So, and then one more conference is today, which I'm going to miss part of it, but the San Diego Rock Art Conference. I've never done that one before, but that's also today. So November 6th is a big day.
Wow.
So listening to that pyramid conference, Marta Thomas's, the third annual the other day, we're talking about pyramids in Ecuador and, similarities to, ziggurats in the Mideast and Sam's Bosnian pyramids and, Father Crespi's collection down in Ecuador, right?
Right.
And boy, you look at those pieces that, gosh, they kind of said that, I don't know if he was right, that the Navy brought to him. I think it was the local people brought to him, right? Those are some incredible Near Eastern looking pieces, Middle Eastern pieces. Is that right?
Some of them, yes.
Now you've got the winged bull there, I believe, or something like that, which would come out of
Yep.
Assyria or Babylon style. And then he had there's writings on there too, which somebody couldn't decipher if they would dare to.
And so, also the Ica stones where, ICA, where, nobody could pay their doctor bills, right? So they brought him all those stones. Just a lot of these collections that have been found all over the world that most people don't know about.
You don't know about the Glozell collection in France?
Yeah, in France, yes.
Yeah.
It even depicts prehistoric animal, or not only prehistoric animals, but Pleistocene animals, and depicts them pretty accurately according to the paleontologists. But of course, they're all modern fakes.
Well, I was really
made by a
interested.
17-year-old farm boy. Yeah.
Well, that's what they said. The reason that gets me interested is that the style of writing looks to be like Etruscan, like Burroughs Cave. And Burroughs
Yes.
Cave has got a symbol you find on a lot of the pieces, like the Detroit plates. Only that, I think, is an upside down 7 on Burroughs Cave. Well, that's also on the Glozell pieces. And they found them, and just like Burroughs Cave or the Detroit plates. Oh, look at what we found. And then it was actually through ridicule from the Americans. These are fake. Don't you know how people fake stuff? And so then they were fake. And then there was arguments. The farmer was accused of faking him, and he got mad. And then they got a guy shot, a young investigator shot. There was a murder there. And then finally, when you had the right kind of technology, they have been analyzed, and they were authentic around 300 BC, as I recall. And then in the journals, they said, well, we want to keep this quiet. We don't want to have the eruption of the Glozell affair and another shooting. So
Yeah.
it's been quiet, but it's the same picture. Let's cover up the evidence.
Yes, and it has more, let's see, what would the right word be? Validity, because it's in the old world.
Yeah.
Nothing in the new world could possibly be that old and that sophisticated.
All right. Well, I'd like to jump in with a question. Are you guys familiar with this book here?
No, not that one.
I can't read very good. Can you show it again or read it for me?
So it's Mysteries of the Pyramid by David H. Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
What do you know about that, Jim? Does that seem like a possible true story?
I don't know. You tell me.
So in like the mid 70s, this guy had spent, 40 years preparing an archaeologist team, a team of all these people. The story is that they went to the Great Pyramid. I know it's so crazy to believe. That's why I'm just trying to ask somebody if they could, but the story is that they went to the Great Pyramid and that there is an entrance near the top. If you use, the proper alpha wavelength, the tones, that the door slides open, that also access at the bottom, and they basically go in there in the cover of night and descend this staircase down to this basically, I don't know, not a hall of records, but just this, room that had humans' history back to 500,000 BC. So I know it's crazy, but you know, the stories of supposedly that the publisher was all ready to publish it. He's all excited, and then gets a call from the FBI that says you're not going to publish that. And then the next 10 publishers, the same thing, which is you're not going to publish that. And it was not the CIA, it was the FBI. So just curious if anybody thought that that's possible inside the pyramid, that there's this repository of information. Just kind of interesting.
Oh, I'm convinced it's possible. In fact, I'd call it likely. I don't think it's the only such repository, but it's the most visible. And let's go back to that story a little bit. If I recall it correctly, they descended through the pyramid to a space underneath the pyramid.
Right.
And it's a cave, and it's a water-filled cave. And they actually found an underground lake underneath the Great Pyramid and took photographs, I might add. Whether that's what it really is or not is kind of not evident in the photographs. But they also used an illustration that was found in the old Rosicrucian documents from late 1880s in on up. They probably had them long before that, but I traced it back that far. And it shows basically the same thing that they claim they transcended, if you will. A lake underneath the pyramid.
And I didn't even know that that was still a question, that there wasn't water underneath. I thought that was more commonly known now.
Well, it's more commonly admitted now, but the archaeologists have not been there to see it themselves. Because it couldn't possibly be true.
So
my contention is, and Steve Meyer's contention, I don't think he was part of the conference, but the Great Pyramid acted as a water pump. Whatever technology they used, and it was probably some version of what we would call an Archimedes screw, pumped water from that lake out the portals, the ones on the sides of the pyramid, to irrigate the fields of Egypt, because Egypt got all of its riches by exporting wheat.
Boy, and what's so interesting, and I've challenged you on this before, and I'm just starting to form my own opinions on things, but the Global Pyramid Conference, you know, really saying that it's that fire within, that why did they build all of these pyramids all around the world? You know, it's hard. It's not hard for me to believe that it was not a water pumping thing. These people think that it's, you know, this basically the Bosnian pyramids, our good friend Sam, you know, the phrase is that he's changing the history of our planet single-handedly, that you can't refute it, that the carbon dating's there, that it's for sure man-made. Again, these pyramids down in Ecuador, the same thing, that his pyramid of the sun, 29,000 years older than what we are told is the beginning of civilization. And so I asked if any Egyptian archaeologists had been out there recently. The answer is 2 have come out there and said, yes, they're real. But, you know, we just all share in the frustration of having this stuff kind of hidden from the public. So, Jim, what do you have to say?
Well, all those, I think the pyramids you talk about are all in the same pattern, sort of. They've got water underneath them. And of course, it comes to the question, well, if they're all the same pattern, there must have been a common architect or education for architects, which means that the aliens must have taken them around with flying saucers. And I would say, well, that's not the only possible answer. Why don't you let people have boats? So I think there's no question that the commonality in construction would argue for diffusion and not independent invention, which is the way that we explain those things away today. There's got to be a reason for it. I'm no expert on it, but there's got to be a reason. And geometry is one. The outside of the Great Pyramid of Giza has all kinds of mysteries inside the way the chambers are. Shows you how you make the golden ratio. It's all there. It's also hidden at Newark, Ohio, the same mysteries in a slightly different way. Again, it goes back to what Pamita would, Menominee elder would say, is that at one time we shared teachers around the world. They came in the boats to our colleges and our people went over there and taught. So it goes back in my mind to a time when people were in communication before. They cut all the trees off in the Middle East and they couldn't make boats anymore.
Yep.
Well,
Well, go ahead.
all right, real quick, then you jump in, Rick. But basically it was that, that we're all vibrations and, that when you're in those pyramids that, especially the Bosnian pyramids, that's the one pyramid that somehow gets its energy from the sun, that beam is shooting towards the sun throughout the day, following that path, and that the energy, it's the only pyramid supposedly that the energy is generated from the sun to the pyramid. All the other pyramids are supposedly the opposite, but basically by activating these pyramids, that you're increasing the planet's energy. Bosnian is sending energy to the sun. So maybe I got that reversed, but we'll get to the bottom of it. Rick, jump in with something. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, all the images of the rendered images of the data for the Bosnian pyramid show a beam going straight up from the pyramid. But because of its latitude, it's never aimed right at the sun.
What I heard was that it's I never heard this before, but during the day that beam is actually somehow changing direction. Have you heard that, or is that not correct?
No, like I said, all the images I've seen show it straight up.
Okay.
So I'd have to see that data to make any kind of a judgment on it.
Okay. All right, well, we can jump around and have some fun because there are some specific questions that I wanted to get to Jim. So is that okay? Anything else on, I guess I would ask one last thing if it's all right on the pyramids, which is that my friend thought that his thinking was that possibly this evolution started on this planet, that there was some jump to our current human species, and that not necessarily, we were being mined for gold, as Sitchin or whoever said, but that there was perhaps this DNA jump that led to humans. The only last thing I would insert as a possibility is that there were perhaps so many different human species that died out, and that at the same time, or around the same time, as one human species dies out, it's like another one kind of gets going. So just if you could both share on that, and then we'll jump around.
Jim, go first.
Well, as far as cultures rising and falling and being replaced by others and so on, we can see that in historical times up here in northern Wisconsin. First you had the Sioux in the area, and then the Indians out east got French guns and they came in and
Yep.
decimated, didn't exterminate them, but essentially decimated the Winnebagos, who were Sioux people, and were replaced by the Algonquins, the Ojibwas and Potawatomis, who are the prominent people now. Although you've got a few people in the Ho-Chunk tribe who claim to be purebreds. Most of the rest of them are half or more outside influence. And then you've got that had the big skeletons in the Adena time, surrounded by smaller people, and you had the stories of giants and little people. It's like getting together a Chinese and a Norwegian in a room. They'd start calling each other giants and little people really fast. And they get replaced. So that can be taken, of course, through thousands of years, and all of a sudden it looks like one group of people has completely replaced another. I have no trouble with that whatsoever.
Well, in historical times, agreed. But when we're talking about the epical times of the ages of these pyramids, and where Chris was going with actual species replacement, I would contend that the species weren't replaced as much as they were absorbed.
Yes, I would agree.
And
Yeah,
that the
Neanderthals,
amalgamation,
yeah,
the amalgamation of all those species is what we have today is Homo sapiens sapien. But we also carry DNA from Neanderthal and probably a half a dozen others, because very little of our DNA is actually traced to any source. We just know that we have it. When they can find one specimen that goes back like 70,000 years with DNA that is, viable, then we can determine just exactly how much was what. But that's going to be a while.
yeah, and then through there as well, you've got certain people who may spent their lives studying the stars, and all of a sudden they've got the geometry. And
Yep.
we have that strong in the Native Americans up here, and of course in Mexico as well. But
Well, we also have tribal evidence. The Anishinaabe, as an example, have traced one village up in there that was covered by a volcano, and the volcanic ash is dated at 70,000 years ago. So they believe, and they're making a case scientifically, that their people have been there for 70,000 years.
yeah, and then you have the traditional stories too. When the Mayans came up to Wisconsin after the symbolic white buffalo was born and wanted to see
Yep.
her, they had fire ceremonies, and we're going through how they taught the kids the calendars in the Mayan jungles. And I said, what about this 26? Why is that so important? So he points up to the sky ahead and he says, well, that's to keep track of the cycles of long time. Did you know 26,000 years? Oh, yeah. He said, we've been here for 2 of those.
Yep. The long count.
Yeah, I was glad there were no archaeologists around the fire, because at that time it was 13,000 BC. When they
Well,
came
you
across
also have
Bering Straits.
the interesting differences in mathematics between the old world of the same basic period and the new world's mathematics, because the ancient Sumerians had 360 days in a year.
So did the Mayans.
Yes. Where'd that other 5 days come from? One of two
Well,
things had to happen. Either the orbital distance from the sun changed, or the rotation of the earth changed,
or the
or some
calendar
combination of the two.
calendar keepers said we'll divide it into 4 seasons of cross quarter day, and each day has a dead day, and then we do the same thing for the new year. I mean, it's part of the mathematics of making sense of the world around us and putting it together too, is part of the evolution. And
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't figure that out from looking at the sky unless you do some deep inquiry. I think that had a lot to do with raising the human mind to handle mathematics as we know it.
Yep, I agree.
And I think this was shared worldwide. According to Pamita, it wasn't secret by some people in India. It was all shared. Traders came and they taught here, and we pick up the Mayan calendar, the last great cycle of 5,200 years, and you find it in India. Same cycle starting a couple, 13 years later. Independent invention?
Not likely. They
Not
are
likely.
watching the same star though.
Yeah, and then when you check to see where the people from India say they got their Kali Yuga calendar, well, it came from a trader called Maya.
Yes.
And here the
And
Mayans
he
in
brought,
Mexico had it 13 years before. So
and they brought him, this trader brought maize and sweet potatoes and beans and a whole bunch of other stuff, according to Carl Johannesson.
oh yeah.
Okay, well, we could continue on the India storyline for a few minutes if you guys don't mind. Jim, can you share with us, you told me a fascinating story just about is it the Vedas, about ancient India, just, very likely that India and China, that this, huge, massive area was a big, large group of people. And so they create these Vedas, and what the Vedas talk about in terms of, blacks and whites and Brahmins, and then also ocean traveling by them.
Well, after that three-headed dagger handle, which is third gold, was found up in the UP 2 years ago, I did some serious studying about after, you see, I retired now, so I could do it, about what the people from India say about their past. So, well, where people like Shaman Lal in the days of Ganges saying that India came to America. He wrote a book, Hindu America. And not only did the United States not like that idea, but the English government didn't either. And so when he was traveling to Mexico, they pulled his passport. And so he had to spend the rest of his life in Mexico. But he had students. And these people say, well, we have stories that we came to the New World. We sailed all the 7 oceans and went to the 7 continents, and brought back metal, got great wealth, and then it all fell apart. So I had Buck try to get me what he could on the original Vedas, and it's interesting to me that the Vedas were supposedly written before the Bible, some of the oldest decipherable records, in Sanskrit, which is the root language of essentially all of the European languages. And so all of us have that cultural root, just like the people in India. They were compiled from hymns. So we've got to be a little bit suspect, because if you have a bunch of hymnals in an old church and you come in and say, well, we want to figure out the history of these people, you'll get an idea, but of course it's going to be biased to what people will think about gods and powers and stuff. But as I see it, that's the origin of the Vedas. And then they had a giant civil war. And it was over sacrifices, how you do your sacrifices. So one group says, well, God doesn't like people not doing their sacrifices. So another group went out to punish them. And this went on and on and on. And they talk about soma, sacred drink. Well, it's about the time the beaker people were spreading throughout Europe.
Yep.
And if they understood how to make soma out of sugarcane or something like that, then the stories about soma and the grinding wheels all make sense. You can see it going on today in Jamaica, same story. And then you can imagine all those beaker ceremonies. And Jay Wakefield talks about them. He's done a lot of study on the beaker people. Well, what better way of promoting trade than alcohol if you can make it and the other guys can't? So that would be a tremendous motivation to trade as well. And then they had weigh stations, or they had, I don't know what they call them, but it would be the same as what Menzies would say. It would be support stations for these travelers all around where they went. And then they had the big Civil War, and essentially the people from India and Persia break apart, and the people from Iran today still have a version of the Vedas called a different name, but between the two, you can get a kind of a picture. You're pretty sure that the astronomy was up in the northern latitudes, so it wouldn't have been down in Sri Lanka where it was put together. It would have been up in the steppes somewhere where the people started. So the way I see it, they had this big civil war, and they say it was over whether people were sacrificing to the gods or not. I see it over somebody wanting to control trade. Same
Yes.
story you get with Helen of Troy and so forth, which ended the peaceful trade in the Mediterranean. The people from in the stories, Indra punishes another guy, but wars go on for a long, long time. And supposedly they destroyed 90 some of these way stations. And the battle was that Indra wanted to open the waters. So this can be interpreted different ways. Were they building dams up in India? And was this what they were all talking about? Or was it trade routes? Or was he trying to control trade routes? In any case, they fought, did them in, that ended the long-range trade, which is nicely being investigated now in Mohenjo-Daro and the Ganges valleys by scholars from Pakistan, various places. You get it on the web. They're deciphering this stuff. They were making, it's now a desert. They're making big boats there. They once had cedars like at Lebanon and made planks. And from the planks, they sewed them together. So there's a new type of boat construction, which allows you to make big boats. But that was being done down in Mohenjo-Daro area before the pyramids were built. In the Assyrian record, you talk about the flying ships and so forth, that the queens were going from here to there. Well, if you've got the technology of manipulating sails, how else do you describe it than flying ships if the rest of your people are paddling? So,
Well, let's curl back to the whole Soma, the nature of Soma. And the story reminds me so much of the distilled version of cocoa that Montezuma served to the Spanish conquistadors. And it has been proven to my satisfaction that cocoa was even this fermented cocoa was marketed into North America as far north as Wisconsin. The Mississippian era natives consumed this beverage in at least 36 different locations because it's found in the pottery of those locations. And another incident is that all that pottery is made in the same style. It's like they had a branded product, just like if you saw a Coca-Cola bottle, you would know what was in that bottle.
Exactly.
And unless they had better bottling techniques than we are admitting, then they had to have rapid transportation, like 3 weeks or so, from southern Mexico, and actually further down Belize, where the cocoa was grown, to probably made someplace in the Yucatan and delivered within 3 or 4 weeks to, well, Wisconsin.
Yeah, unless it was fermented enough so you had enough alcohol so it can be handled like still today called soma in Jamaica, which is made from rum, essentially from sugar.
Yeah.
Okay. And they had the sugar in India, sugar cane there, they had it here. The old stories that talk about making soma, it became a major industry, near as I can tell from the old hymns, because they talk about the grinding of the wheels, making soma. Well, that's not the mushrooms that the Finns use, which may have been the original origin of soma. So once you can start making intoxicated drinks, any way, shape, or form, be it beer, vodka, rum, you've got a market. And if you're already trading, you're going to move it and people are going to come to you. So, yeah, the stories of the Aztlans going south into Mexico to become the Aztecs, the codices say, well, along the way, the chief, they show him as wrinkle-faced and so on, he was drunk. So they came up with rules to control alcohol.
Yep.
And you either drink in religious ceremonies or don't drink at all. And if you were caught drinking outside of religious ceremonies, you could be killed. Well, if that sort of thing was going on at the time of the Beaker people, the time of Indra, there would be people saying, no, this is an excess. No, you're not going to prohibit us. And so you got the remnants of a civil war, which ended the India trade. But there are not only the dagger handle up there in Portage Lake area in the UP, not only do we have that, we've got, according to students of Chapman Law and so on, people who had studied the ceremonies of the Pueblo people, where they have these stories in the kivas that they had this little hole in the ground, and out of there we came from under the earth. Well, he says, of course, Patala, they knew about the earth being round.
Yeah. Well, Nez Perce had the same origin, but
yeah. And so a lot of those stories supposedly can be traced to certain temples in India, which are still operating.
yes.
So if we just let them have boats, they could have done it. But Mohenjo-Daro now is a desert, like out west. And according to the researchers, they cut all the big trees down. And they could no longer make boats. So they had to bring their boats in from somewhere else, Spain, Lebanon. And then they started making bronze. Yeah. And what at that time they didn't know about making coke, they made charcoal. And that takes care of the trees. And
Yep.
so they, just like Easter Island, they killed all the trees, cut all the trees, and that was the end of it. And so the
Yep.
descendants probably got into America, as certain people say, along with Chinese, along with these and those, and Southeast Asians and so forth. So it gets back to the story. I think we're a mixture. I think this is a melting
Amalgamation.
pot and has been a melting pot for not only after the 1776 period, but for thousands of years.
Or tens of thousands. But yeah, that's pretty much my take on it too. Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
Just how, the country of Crete, the Minoans, just perhaps being involved in, that stuff, and perhaps the same people or of, this India, China big area. The stories that I just heard the other day about Jesus being in India, basically being financed by his great uncle, I believe, Joseph of Arimathea, that he traveled around Tibet. But the thing I wanted to say was that there is this lamasery in Tibet that basically has these stories, and I think it's on the walls there, of Jesus visiting there. And
Mary.
Mary? Oh, and Mary?
Yep.
And also on there is that they heard about his killing or his death later, and they were saddened by that. So, whatever that has to do with anything.
Yeah, they don't portray him as a prophet so much as a very high level scholar.
And so you have these early years of Jesus, financed by Joseph of Arimathea type thing, that he's traveling all around as far as Tibet, India, supposedly learning the mystery school, learning, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice segue to jump into a rather fun topic that I like to talk about. Jim, do you have anything you want to say before my big question?
Well, Joseph of uncle of Jesus was, from lots of sources, involved in the last of the Phoenician tin trades.
Yep.
It went out of the Mediterranean up to Cornwall and so forth. So it continued, and the Phoenicians were some of the people who inherited the navigation skills to get across the ocean. So you'd expect him and all the travelers, if they took him into confidence, to show him places. That could also be Mohenjo-Daro area, which would get you up into India. And if you're in Cornwall, of course, there's no big deal to jump over to Greenland and down to North America, which you can almost see, almost all the days you're sailing. And so tribe after tribe up here talk about him walking, the guy you call God, in this country as well. It's entirely possible. And then you get the stories, and then you can put the stories together and try to say, is this something that early missionaries brought over, or so on? Well, we don't know, but nevertheless, we shouldn't dismiss the stories as impossible because we believe they are.
Very good. Okay, so you'll find this funny. I found it funny. So Ancient Origins, the website, they basically had a page that said, we are the only website that you need to go to for all of your history. I just thought you guys would find that funny.
Tell me about this site.
Ancient,
Sounds like,
yeah.
where is it located? Oh, you
It's
mean the
an
website?
internet site.
That's the
Yeah.
only website. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they're like, whatever. I just couldn't believe that some website would have the nerve to say, basically, you're the only place. This is the only place you need to go. I actually think they're from Ireland, is where the address is. And the phrase I heard from somebody was, maybe that's all that they, maybe they have some strings being pulled that says, this is all we want you to feed to people. the point is, I just thought that was outrageous and comical.
Have you seen that before, that we've got the full truth and you don't need to listen
Yeah,
to
time or
anyone
two.
other than us? I think that's a human tendency more than
Department of
reality.
Education, yeah.
Well, and so super interesting, NERA, New England Research Association. I can't help but relay some of our frustrations towards them, or some of our friends' frustrations towards them of, they had Sue Carlson and Rosalind Strong were at the helm of that for so many decades. And they obviously screened, what came in, what was accepted, what they said was true, what they don't think is true, then they don't allow in. And so that must be a human nature thing to say, you can really steer and guide different groups and stuff. And, a lot of us in our groups are frustrated that they won't even listen to anything we have to say sometimes. So.
Well, Barry Fell, who did early work out there with his inscriptions of languages and so on, found so much of it and came up with the theory that the people from Libya also went up to Ireland, and they got here along this coast. And that was the only possibility. And Winborough's cave stones came out, and we were showing them down at Columbus, Ohio. He called at the beginning of the meeting and wanted to address everybody that these were fake. They're all fake. And he could tell that by just looking at the script without examining it. So if anybody can take that stance like Barry Fell, he's susceptible in old age to the same phenomena. And it can happen group after group after group, unless we learn from history. But as long as we destroy the past, we'll never learn. So it becomes a phenomena you can expect.
Yeah, I heard that Barry Fell, although his contributions in his books, America BC, Saga America, etc., that and his Epigraphic Society journal, incredible work. What a life work.
Yeah.
But the criticism I heard of him was that sometimes he said it was this. I say it's Libyan, but I don't tell you why it's Libyan.
I believe. So it becomes then the old ipsa dicit business that Galileo had to confront.
Yep.
I say so. Ipsa dicit basically can be translated that way. And if the Pope says the sun goes around the earth, everybody's supposed to believe that. And so that was challenged at the beginning of the scientific age, but we see the same thing going on now. He wasn't, and as the Nicholases point out too, when they found Chinese writing down south in Illinois area, Fell wouldn't address it. You mean people from China got here before Columbus? No, it was white people out of northern Africa.
Out of Chicago criminals carving Chinese runes.
And so you're going to these sites in New England with, the Native American elder. Who knows if he's the head elder? I mean, I know friends that don't even know this guy, Indians that don't know this guy. So maybe he's a great elder. He doesn't seem to be the elder. Otherwise, my people would probably know him. But they go to the site, and you have a Native American that basically says, this is our site. We don't want you to, mess up with the spirits of our site. And it's just, that's, I guess, the way it is. But, I guess that's just the way it is to have access to some of these sites, right? Like the ones up in Wisconsin, Powers Bluff, et cetera. I mean, you have to have the natives access. It's just when they say this was done before us, how wonderful of a start that is versus this is for sure ours.
Yeah, there's few sites I've been at that said our people did this. We may have added this to it. But basically, the ancient sites were formed by other people before we came here.
Yeah. So everybody wants their power and control, and certainly a lot of money for their not Native American groups, but just, it's just an interesting psychology. I feel that we come to these things with an open heart and open, versus this guy has written 7 books on just pyramids in Egypt. That was his whole world, his whole brain. And we are able to come at it from other angles because we're not beholden to anybody saying we have to do things a certain way. So just interesting. So,
well, I think the guide that will get us through this quagmire is keep in mind that the scientific method should be used in the scientific age to give us truth. You look at the data, you make sure the data is solid, then you analyze it. And then if it's contrary to your beliefs, you change your beliefs. But so often we throw out data that we find uncomfortable. And then if necessary, we throw out the data to keep our beliefs.
It happens all too often.
That's the comedy we're in. This is just the reality, unless people learn how to break out of it.
I've really learned about the power of belief, and listening to this pyramid conference, whether it's crystals, whether it's they're certain that Thoth built the pyramid and that sarcophagus is chambers just for him. It's and I'm trying to be very careful with not acting so certain about anything, obviously, because the power of belief is a very interesting thing that I have been learning. It's amazing. So,
but you've got the ancient stuff there. Do you recognize this at all?
I do. It's a sextant.
Well, yeah, it's
Kind of.
The elements of the sextant, the father of the sextant. The Chinese called it the torquetum.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it was supposedly used by the Ming navigators in 1420. So they had already developed it for a portable unit they could take from port to port. Now it's basically a transit with a tiltable piece in between the upper and the lower plates, so you can put in the latitude of the site. This becomes the equatorial plane. This becomes a declination. But you find this as big as wagons in the writings from China in about 1000 AD. And then they got after the Ming, explore around and try to share their knowledge. It shows up in Europe and becomes the torquetum, and we modify it to use it for astrology, which it wasn't meant for. It was meant for navigation. But anyway, it's sitting and nobody knows about the torquetum, basically, except when we couldn't survey anymore in Wisconsin because we got up in northern Wisconsin and Michigan, and the iron ore up there prevented the compass from working. Lo and behold, the director of the Bureau of Land Management somehow got into the archives and made a unit just about like this, which is called the Hertz Solar Compass, so you can get direction from the sun, and a patent and so on, but nothing new. Chinese had it. And the Canadian Air Force then used a smaller version. They call them the Astro Compass to guide the planes in northern Wisconsin, northern America, over the poles in various places, again, using the sun. And as Needham points out in his book on Chinese science, the 100-inch telescope, when it was set up, or wherever it was, Mount something or other, Wilson, I suppose, it was just a targetum built for that particular latitude. So when we get to the point where we really need something, we go back to this. But these are big as wagons in India and China, way before we ever got to spherical equations, spherical trig. And this solves what we handle today by spherical trigonometry mathematically. But it's almost spooky because it does it mechanically. We can't understand them, so we tend to put it away, except we need something. We could drag it out again.
Very good, Jim. Well, that's a lot newer and nicer than the other ones that I've been seeing on eBay and the first one that you showed me. So good job in acquiring that one. That's a special.
No, we made this one. Bob Hughes made it years ago before we knew what a targetum was, because we needed something that would do a job. Bob made it, and then he found out you could get them surplus when they scrapped the bombers from World War II. So we got a couple of those.
Very good. Okay, Rick, do you have anything? Otherwise, I have a big last conversation for us.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, actually, one quick little topic, and then we'll go to the big one, which is garden beds in the Americas, and that was used to, in all likelihood, feed a big working force that was extracting the copper. Jim, can you start on that just because you heard that recently at the AAPS conference, and then Rick jump in after? Is that all right?
Sure.
Well, garden beds are associated with the effigy mounds down here. Wild rice was the important grain, but then they started planting corn around 800 AD, and it gradually moved north. And usually their ridge is about 1 to 2 feet high. And so even the small difference between the top and the bottom of such a ridge would be enough so that if you got your seeds on the top, you may freeze on the bottom, but you can push your growing season. These are normally just in small, plot gardens, family plots, village at the most. But what they're finding, researchers are pointing out that in southern Michigan, around the border between Wisconsin and Michigan, and elsewhere, they're gigantic, like 300 acres, which is, and laid out, the whole thing laid out systematically, like under supervision. So the logic is that there's no reason for this amount of production of food unless you're supporting something. And on the other end, we look at all the miners that must have been up to northern Wisconsin working in the mines in the summer. They had to eat. So you can logically connect the dots. These are called commercial scale, industrial scale garden facilities in an area where there was industrial scale mining in the summer and these people had to eat. So common sense would say, well, that's a good possibility.
Very good.
Or export.
Yeah, of course you could export it too.
And the other,
Anyway, that's my only comment on it.
the other thing I heard was the canals, that I never thought of that before the conference a few years ago, that these canals were, off of that they were man-made canals for portage, right?
Well, they're all across the country, yeah. We've got a few up near the copper country. But you get down to Yucatan, that was a road system, mile after mile of
Florida as well. The current estimate is there were 200,000 miles of canals in Florida before
Really?
Columbus got it.
Hmm.
Very good. Okay, does anybody need to take a break before our final topic?
How long are we going to go with this? I have an appointment.
Do you have 15 minutes?
Yes,
Okay.
Go for
I
it.
need 3 minutes.
Okay.
Break.
All right. 3 minutes. We'll take a break. Okay.
All right. So what is our final topic?
All right. Well, there were two quick little things that we talked about when you were gone, Rick. One was the island up above Oak Island that Gavin Menzies talks about, where Jim, just fill us in really quick on the smelting on an industrial scale up there, iron, right?
Yeah, Chinese smelter area. Big one,
And then we
according to Menzies.
talked about the Royal Wiper and peen whenever you have a chance, right? Never
Yeah.
give up a good opportunity. Okay, so here is the topic that I want to just close with. Been wanting to get you to talk about this for a while, Jim. Rick, please jump in with anything. It's just a story that Jim had told me. So you have just start wherever you want to start, Jim, on the fur trade, the French, the Jesuits, the Catholic Church, and then you have this bloodline that is living up in Canada, the Saguenay. Just tell us a story about wanting to get rid of that bloodline and yeah, that's it.
Well, this can be somewhat embarrassing to certain people, but there are stories and patterns in Europe that after Rome kind of disintegrated, the church took over. And then there was Constantine and Charlemagne and so forth. And the area in France had a group of people that said that the family of Jesus, after the riots down in the Holy Land, came up and settled at Lyon, France, and that his relatives were up there, and that they married into the Merovingian dynasty of the French rulers. And then this was then called the royal bloodline. And they ruled for quite a while, except then Clovis and a few other people were chosen to be the enforcers or the heroes of the religious authorities. And so then they had to not only take the rule away from the Merovingians, but they had to then put them down. And so that is then the royal bloodline that was through propaganda attacked at that time. And then you had along, after the Crusades, the Templars coming along, and that they fought with a group of people who were targeted to be exterminated by one of the Crusades, the Albigensian Crusade, because they were heretics. Well, they claimed to be of the royal bloodline. And the Templars got on the wrong side of the battle and fought the armies of the Pope, and so then they were into trouble. But the Templars were associated with protecting the royal bloodline, Sangre Real. And the wars against the heretics, anybody who does not support church authority, that was a heretic in those days. And you can be tortured to get you to change your mind or burned at the stake if you couldn't change your mind. That's all part of this history. So they were still trying to eliminate the Cathar heresy. At the time, the French were coming here on their explorations. Now, one of the things that I found interesting is that the French were in control of the Wisconsin area, and the Jesuits were trying to convert and save the souls of the pagans, except they turned on a group of people called the Sauk Fox, and tried to exterminate them in Wisconsin. And we had the Sauk Fox Wars. The French lost. That's the reason we speak English and not French. Well, what always bothered me is how in the world could the Catholic Church go along with trying to exterminate a tribe when their stated purpose was to save their souls. But understanding what was going on in Europe at that time, that would work if these were already Christians, but of the wrong flavor.
Right. Heretics in the view of the church.
So then we get to the records when in the 1500s still, I think it's Cadet, the name is not right, but one of the first explorers into the St. Lawrence River met the Mohawks and said, oh, there's a group of people up here at the Saguenay River who are white, just like you. They don't wear furs, they wear woven cloths and so on and so on. They got white and some are blonde. So he went up, and sure enough, in his report, he shows pictures that his artists put together of this meeting, just like meeting any other sovereign group in Europe. So he comes back, and then there was pressure to go up there and conquer these people. And Champagne, who was reportedly recovering Templar, dragged his feet, and it took him 40 years or so before the army went up there to conquer these people, like the Cortez conquered Mexico City. By the time they get up there, they're all gone. They disappeared. And so then where did they go? Well, obviously they knew what was up and what was going to happen. And so they amalgamated with the French, or they spoke French already, probably. And so then we have, following that, the wars of the French against the Sauk, near extermination up at Butamort, which is up by Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where our history, what we teach our kids in school, is that the Sauk wanted tolls for the French on their portages. The French didn't want to pay it, so they started this war of extermination. Well, we can make sense of that in this modern capitalistic attitude we have. But anyway, that's what's sold. And that French gunboats surrounded the city or the village and killed all the people and put their bones in the mound Butamort. Now, on the last trip to Beaver Island, there was a Irish guy who gave me a book compiled by his people right after they got here as refugees from the Batavus famine. And it was about the Chippewa story. Battle of Butte. Said, and say why, we decided we're going to exterminate these white people. And we drove them from island to island, Beaver Island, Garden Island, down to Washington Island, and up the Red River, as he calls it, which is obviously up to Green Bay, up to their village. And we surrounded them, starved them out, killed them all, and put the bones of all these white people in this mound at Butte. Now, the same story, except we say there were Sauk Indians, and the Indians, Chippewas, say these are white people.
Yeah.
And then, according to lists, the name Saguenay means sacred bloodline. French. End of my story.
So getting back to the Sauk Fox, depending on which language you're speaking, the Fox River was, if I recall correctly, the southeastern bounds of their land. Is that accurate?
I can't say. It was going
Okay.
back and forth, and people were fighting.
Yeah, well, yeah, and all the borders changed all the time, but that one runs through Burlington, Wisconsin, just
You got it.
barely into Wisconsin. However, I will say this, 3 miles away at Rochester, there is a signal hill that is recognized by USGS as a signal hill,
Rochester, where?
Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Rick,
Yeah,
you got
and
It
that
actually,
was,
it actually has a nail and a marker. So
Yeah.
it's doubly significant because it has a text marker.
you're right. And it's the Sauk who have the stories of the Sauk that they sent messages all across this country from Signal Hill to Signal Hill somehow. And it was them up to 30 miles away.
Yep,
And that tied in Butte-Mort with, you know, down to Sauk City, named after them, down to another Signal Hill to the south, and then Belmont, first capital. Yeah. So these Sauk people were not normal run-of-the-mill people. They had special talents.
yes, they certainly had special talent.
And just in terms of making sense out of the French and the Indians stories, if you're going to hunt deer, the best way to hunt deer is you have somebody that is going to stay where the drive is going to end, and you have other people driving. And so the Chippewas were the mercenaries for the French.
Yep.
They were acting in this scenario like driving in the prey, and the French were at the end. So united, they could exterminate, but they didn't get them all.
No, they didn't get them all. And the Seneca didn't get all the fox, but they did pretty much get all the Wea.
Seneca were fighting the fox, huh?
Yep. Raiding,
That makes
they were
sense.
raiding. It wasn't necessarily the same time period as the French guns, but it was English versus French support.
Yeah.
Well, good job, guys. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful session. So very good.
Indeed, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I have to go be responsible horse owner. Then I have to go be responsible bar owner. And shortly after that, I have to go be a responsible grandfather to a girl who's having her 8th birthday.
Wow. You can handle all that responsibility? Okay, it looks like you're doing good.
Yeah, well, I have a really good partner to share in it. So
Oh, wonderful.
Thanks,
And you
Rick.
got a
Thank you.
new dog too. Boo.
Yes. Say hi, Boo.
Boo.
Oh. Hi, sweetie. Hi, Boo. Boo, boo. Well, I'll stop. Okay. Thanks,
Anyway.
guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
See you
Jim.
later.
Bye, Rick. Thank you.